if I told you, and this is a true statistic, I think about 80% of projects are more than 50% delayed.
That's
No,
horrible.
it's horrible, but nobody's surprised. Nobody's saying like that's impossible, right? And the thing is that we've also just over the years built this sense of expectation that the project's going to be late.
Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. This is Darren Pulsford, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host. On this episode, Revolutionizing Construction with AI, with founder and CTO of InPlan, Alan Mosca. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Darren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, this is a really interesting topic because when we think of artificial intelligence, we're always thinking of white collar work and everyone's, it only helps me write emails or it helps me, scientific stuff. We're going to get down to some really cool things on building real things like the real world and how AI is going to help. But before we dive into that, everyone that listens to my show knows that I only have superheroes on the show, and every superhero has an origin story. Alan, what's your origin story?
Sadly, there are no spider bites or anything glamorous. I was born and grew up in Italy and quickly became effectively a computer scientist. I studied computer science as my bachelor's, then moved to the UK in 2006 and started working in what you would probably call high performance computing. Think supercomputers, but before it was for AI. So there's a lot of government labs and things like that. Moved into high frequency trading, which sounds a little bit like a side move, but there's a very deep connection between the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Transitioned from computer scientist to quant researcher. Whilst I was doing that for about 8 years, I did a part-time master's and part-time PhD in machine learning theory. Got to the end of all that and thought, oh, well, why don't we do something a little bit more tangible? I want to take more risk. And that's how I then joined an incubator called Entrepreneur First, where I met my co-founder, and we came up with the idea of InPlan.
Well, what I find interesting about this is you went way outside of your training.
Yes.
You didn't stick like what I did, right? I have a similar background. I was in high performance computing, part of the open grid forum and the global grid forum and all that back at the turn of the millennium. But I'm a computer scientist as well, and I work for Intel, high tech. I just stayed in high tech. Not very well. I was a CIO of a juice company at one time, a one product juice
I want
company.
to hear that story.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that another. That was interesting. But you moved into construction.
Yeah. It was a little bit the result of the time, and also a bit the fact that I was trained over the years to think about risk in particular ways. So just to give you a little bit of context, it was a time when in London they were building a project called Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line. It was estimated at the time to be around £8 billion. And it was supposed to be finished in 2018. So the origin story for InPlan itself dates back to 2017. That's when I was in the incubator. But there was so much news coming out about delays and being over budget. At the same time, there was High Speed 2, which is a high-speed railway that connects London to Birmingham. At the time, it was planned to go to Manchester as well. That route got shortened. We're talking about California high-speed rail sort of budgets. We're in like the 100 billion-ish.
That's crazy.
And that also was always in the news. And at the same time, the largest contractor in the company largest contractor in the country called Carillion exploded. So there were about 70,000 people that became jobless overnight. And the story with Caridian is interesting because there was a lot of financial mismanagement that happened effectively to cover up things getting thrown sideways by risk, and so there was a lot of financial mismanagement in a sense, but a lot of it was just literally accumulation of just bad projects going over and over and over and over.
So
Um,
yeah, let's talk about that because I can think of some big, huge civil engineering construction projects, like the high-speed rail in California, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, hundreds of billions, sorry, billions of dollars over budget. The Big Dig in Boston,
oh
way
yeah.
over budget. And as soon as opened, parts of it were falling on top of cars. I mean, what is the deal? I mean, you can even go all the way back to the Denver airport, the
Oh,
new
Denver
Denver
Airport,
airport.
another one of those case studies. Yeah, same
Yeah, a
as the
huge
Berlin
case study.
Airport.
Yeah, what's the deal, Alan? You're in this space. Why are these things failing, consistently failing? Have you pinpointed one reason why, or is it just
Oh yeah,
too many
it's down
reasons?
to one single thing. No, it isn't. Sadly, it
No.
isn't. In fact, it's the exact opposite of that. So if you think about these projects, right, the larger the project, the larger the schedule and the number of moving parts. So you have project schedules that could be 50 to 100,000 activities. And all of these are made in like very linear sequences, right? So you have 100,000 things, and each one of them depends on each other. As soon as one of them goes wrong, and I promise you
Everything
one of
falls
them
apart.
will, you just don't know which one, everything starts falling apart. And then projects are immediately in catch up mode, and you start thinking about, oh, okay, maybe we work 24/7 instead of 8 hours, 8 hours a day. And you start replanning on the fly and trying to fix things as they are breaking. So you're patching the plane as it's crashing. Um, and that is not a good recipe for getting things done on time and on budget, right? And projects do get done, and eventually in most cases we forget that it was over budget and it was delayed or whatever else happened, mostly because we get the benefit out of the project. But it does then carry the stigma where if I told you, and this is a true statistic, I think about 80% of projects are more than 50% delayed.
That's
No,
horrible.
it's horrible, but nobody's surprised. Nobody's saying like that's impossible, right? And the thing is that we've also just over the years built this sense of expectation that the project's going to be late, and it's a little bit sad to be at this point. And so we started thinking about what can we do? How can we fix that going forward? And if you think about it from a first principles perspective, you're basically combining large amounts of complexity with large amounts of uncertainty. And that is where forecasting and decision making work at their best if you use them well. And so it all starting from there, and my background in risk, but also just the notion of risk not being easily quantifiable, right? So if I tell you what's the risk of the S&P, well, I mean, the risk on the S&P maybe is actually topical, but all
Yeah,
of these
right
things are
now it is.
incredibly quantifiable in financial markets because what you're dealing with is numbers at
Yeah.
every point of the stack. If you're doing it for a building, you're doing it for an airport, you're doing it for a new railway or a road, you're starting to fall out of the quantitative and into the even not even just qualitative, but even just narratives and stories, like what's going to happen if one concrete delivery is late, or if we can't dig the hole fast enough and we have to send the concrete trucks back. And you start going into that way of thinking, which is very hard to do at scale.
All right, so that's really interesting because you turned something that I would have thought was totally measurable into a narrative, which is really what happens. Because I've been in these big projects, because software projects are very similar to these construction projects. And people don't understand that. They think, oh, software, it's easy. And there's millions of moving parts in big projects. And you're only doing it once, just like a railway. I'm building a railway once. It's not like manufacturing where I just build it again and again and again. That's not how it works. So you've created a narrative around this, which I think is brilliant because a lot of times we can't articulate that part of it, the dependencies
No,
and risks and all that.
absolutely right. And if you think about the narrative part of it, it is millions of possible different narratives that could happen at any point on a project. And so the problem is that we plan these things very, very statically and deterministically, right? So there'll be a schedule somewhere that has 200,000 of activities. I'm going to make this up because I don't know the actual details, but it says that the California High Speed Railway will be open to the public for the first running train on, let's say, the 31st of October, 2036, right? And just making that statement is crazy. And instead, you have to think about all the uncertainties that unfold, which then contain all the possible narratives. And by examining all those possible narratives, then you start coming to conclusions about what do I need to do to make sure that that does happen on the 31st of October, 2036, or close enough to it, right? But the idea is what levers can I pull today to reduce the uncertainty in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, or even in 1 year, in one
It
year's
sounds like I
time?
need a quantum computer to handle that.
Quantum computing is actually very exciting to me because it does scale
Yeah.
up the simulation so much.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, now I can see all possibilities at once.
Exactly. So we do the
Right.
next best thing, which is we try and forecast at the quantitative level the uncertainty of every single activity on a project, and then we combine those together into multiple different narratives. And there are limitations to the amount of compute that we can and or are willing to use for this.
Yeah, I
So
was going to say
we're
that's a
not
lot.
covering the infinite space, right? But even that then opens your eyes to things that are possibly a little bit remote, a little bit obscure, but then end up having a massive impact.
All right, so you'll break down a big project into these chunks, these narratives, and are you simulating um, all the different scenarios that you identify? That could be billions of scenarios.
Yeah. So
I mean, how are you handling that?
yeah, we're not doing all the scenarios. Sadly, this is why quantum computing would be really exciting to me, right? But the idea is that let's try and cover the most probable pathways. And so if you start thinking
Okay,
in
that makes
terms of
sense.
what are the different pathways that my project can take, so we have a schedule now, and we make an uncertainty projection based on the intention and the information that we have today. It says, most likely event is that we'll be 6 months late on whatever we're building. Let's say a data center. But then I have to map out all the pathways, right? Because if I look at my plan and know that it might be 6 months late and just do it the same way, then I, as a project manager, should be fired. So I have to make decisions to do better. And so then you start mapping what are all the possible interventions, the possible different ways of running the project. How can I intervene on, say, my concrete deliveries or steel? And maybe steel now has greater uncertainty. So maybe I want to make sure that that happens a little bit earlier, because we might end up with steel stuck in customs where nobody knows how much we've got to pay in
Who's going to
tariffs
pay
or
the
things like that.
tariffs on them, right?
Exactly, exactly. So the idea is like, let's try and map the most probable pathways and we'll do 5, 10, 15,000 of them. And then let's try and build the alternative schedules that we can use to inform our decision making. And then we'll take, this all happens in our software, and our clients will look then at what are the recommendations, what are the suggestions that come out, and try and drive a decision-making process. Now, the decision-making process itself is also incredibly complex and has enormous amounts of what I call internal politics as well.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
those sadly are the things that AI can't help with, and the humans have to solve for themselves. But it's incredibly exciting to then realize that there's so much opportunity to make those projects more reliable and have a better risk profile, so that we actually do decide to build things, right? Because we carry then this weight of, oh, I've done this thing so many times and it's always been late. Let's not do the next one. Right? And that's the risk to humanity that I worry about a lot, is we might end up not doing things because we think they're going to cost too much or they're going to be too risky.
So explain a little bit then how you have all these scenarios. I have different paths to take with mitigation on the risk. So you turn these projects into risk management portfolios.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Right, and
Which
fortunately,
means you are actively engaged in it. This really means that your project managers really have to be skilled to do this. It's not your typical project manager that goes, "Tell me how far along you are. Tell me how far
yeah,
along you are." It's these guys are really turned into risk mitigators that are looking at several different scenarios. They're really earning their keep.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for the larger projects, they have actually risk management teams now, and so that's very exciting just to see that the culture is changing in this respect, and we're playing a part, but there is, a big culture shift that needs to happen, and a lot of that culture shift is happening more from the owners, so the clients of construction. So think your DOTs or your network rail in the UK, for example, or you might have your private buyers of data centers or energy companies who then contract the contractors, because, and this is where the market is a little bit messed up, the contractors sometimes actually make more money from a delay because of how the contract is set up.
Of course.
And you have also this distortion of trying to bid as low as possible and as fast as possible and then making it up later, right? And that the more savvy owners don't have those types of contracts. They have a more collaborative risk sharing, and they are also the ones that are impacted by the risk, right? If you think about what is the loss of starting up let's say a power plant 2 weeks late versus the cost of mitigating certain risks, we might actually be talking about millions of dollars a day.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So how is AI playing a role in this? Because there's a lot of moving parts. It's all narrative based, which, hey, large language modules are great at that sort of stuff, right? How can I start leveraging these, generative AI and large language models to help me manage it? Because it's extremely complex. What's my first approach? What can I do?
Yeah. So we do effectively three different things that you might think are slightly orthogonal, but then you can start piecing them together. So one is that forecasting of the uncertainty and the
Okay.
projection of what is my static projection right now, right? This is my plan currently. This is where I am, the progress that I've had so far. This is where I'm headed, right? So I'm going to call it step zero. If you don't have that, that's the first thing that you need. So you have visibility forward. Then, and you can do that with machine learning trained on previous outcomes of projects and activities. And then you can start doing two more things. One is generate your options. So think about, how can
Oh,
I do this
yeah.
differently, right? Or how can I make change from this point? And the idea is you go wide, and you have this like diamond approach that is used in design as well, where you go as wide as possible, make as many options as you can, and then narrow it down to the most likely ones and the most desirable ones, and see, first of all, if there's some overlap between most likely and desirable, well done. So a lot of the time there isn't, and then you have to think about what are the decisions that move you off those most likely undesirable parts and into the desirable ones. So you start looking at the switches. And the third part is going to be, we have to scale this process up, right? So there's a little loop that happens on these projects about once a month. So there'll be a schedule, and there'll be some sort of reporting that goes up into executive management. And then there is some risk forecasting, decision making, and some changes that happen to the schedule as a result of that decision making. And also, change orders, new materials, design changes. But that little loop usually happens, if you're lucky, once a month, and it takes more than a month to run that loop.
Oh
So
gosh.
effectively, you might be looking at implementing decisions in April that were made in February based on a schedule that you got in January.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
Then
too
you have
long,
this enormous
right?
lag. So the idea is then, like, can you actually use the forecasting, the option generation, and option generation is widely based on LLMs to speed up that loop and have some agentic behavior that lets you really go wide on the whole thing at scale. And we've just recently added a little bit, which is the schedule generation itself. So we just created some models that can do that with the detail that you would get from a planning team. And so you combine all that together, and a few different models and a few different processes, but then you can actually run that loop very fast, and you can run it. We have clients that have done, instead of doing one risk analysis every 6 months, they will do 80 in a month, which is like a
Wow.
very big step change.
So that's going to require some more oversight in some respects, right? Because now I've got more options than I had before, and I can make changes quicker than I have in the past. So that's gonna mean I'm gonna have to exercise different business muscles that I haven't probably used very often, right? And are
Yeah.
you finding new training or of your PMs and your risk managers because of this, or of the owners or of the project or corporate sponsor, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are two ways. There's one way that it connects straight into the executive. So if you can do it at scale for one project, you can do it at scale for all of them. And so you can
Right.
then start aggregating all of this risk profile that you get. Say that you're an organization that does multiple projects, then you can actually start having a view of how that maps to your balance sheet, right? And that's how you get decisions made quickly. If you can connect it back to the balance
Oh yeah,
sheet,
if you connect it to dollars, yeah,
yeah,
or
exactly,
pounds, yeah.
exactly. And the second thing that I think is super interesting is that the shift in skill set from the best project managers and project directors that we've seen is that they stop thinking about the past and the present, and they start thinking about the future. And for the absolute, I'm going to say, like, top 1% of the ones that I speak to, I've talked about this. There's a tiny group which started from the Rand Corporation of all places.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, it's called Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty. It's very academic, but what they've done is they've developed a lot of frameworks for thinking about how to make decisions when the uncertainty is dominating everything that you do. And so you start from a very liberating assumption of, our forecast could be completely wrong. We don't even know. And obviously, like, I don't say this when we're doing sales at
Of
Implant, but
course not.
like, the forecasting is part of it. And the better the forecasting, the better the decisions. But if you rewind it to that abstract point at the beginning and you say, we have no way of verifying a forecast right now, because the only way to verify a forecast is to let the thing run and see if we were right, and then it's too late.
Right, yeah.
So you take that liberating assumption and you start thinking about, what are the points at which I need to make different decisions, right? So DMDU has this notion of pathways, and a pathway is literally like a line of decision making that takes you from where you are now to the outcome that you want. But you may actually have to make different decisions along the way because your information might change, or there's a lot of randomness, right? So you have
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
never enough certainty of where you are going to be next. And the best ones start thinking in that way. They don't even necessarily need to know about the MDU, but you start seeing that switch. And we start seeing that switch. It's very vindicating because we've been following the MDU for 4 years now and trying to do. I call it a lot of our products. I say they do the MDU by inception. So we don't have to teach the MDU to anyone, but we're
No,
supporting
because
that
it's
process of thinking.
no, that's really interesting. So we are going to see a shift. And I've talked about this about other careers. It is AI and its capabilities are going to take over some of that more rote and repetitive stuff that we do into us thinking at much higher levels
Yeah.
and being able to comprehend and understand things that are much more complex without us getting into the details. And this is a prime example of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm very excited to see where it's going to go. For anyone who's worried about, whether AI is going to take their job literally in our space, I think the jobs are going to change, right? So you're not going to spend all your time thinking about one particular pathway, but what you do change is, but actually we might end up needing a lot more people because now we're covering a lot more of the space of the uncertainty, and we might end up making much better decisions and, building spaceports and things on Mars and everything else. If you really push your imagination to the left on
Do,
this.
do you think this will really change the end results? Have we already had some experience? Because you're right. It's kind of stuck in our culture when we say, oh, that big project, say that it's going to take 5 years. We all know it's going to take at least 8.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
right. And it's a little bit sad, right? And so I'd love that to stop being the case. But also in terms of change that we've already seen, I think there's a few projects that were going to get canned. And actually High Speed 2 in the UK has changed so many times, right? And a lot of it is driven by politics and changes of government. But the running joke that I make is like every time it hits 100 billion, a piece gets chopped off, right? Um, and I think that is a result of even a government not being able to carry so much risk. Not so much from the monetary perspective, because I think they can definitely find the money, but from the reputational
yeah.
and losing votes, I guess, also a perspective where you let just the project run into that type of budget without intervening, right? And so I think that is already changing. And fortunately, High Speed 2 is well underway, so it's going to get done one way or another, but there are so many others, right? And so we think about the LA Olympics, there's so much work that is about to kick off or being planned and the Olympics are a very special case, right? Because you
Well,
either get
yeah.
it done on time or you're not going to have an Olympic
But
village or
they pour concrete the night before. Right? A
yeah,
lot of times you're like, oh wow, that's barely going to make it, right? We've
yeah.
seen that for lots of Olympics. If people want to find out more about your approach, you guys have any white papers or a website that people can go to find out more?
Yeah, we have a ton of different types of papers and case studies and demos on our website, nplan.io. That's NPLAN. And we've published a couple of academic papers. We have an ML research team that also does some fundamental research, which is pretty interesting.
Well, that's great. So that's a great resource for them. Alan, we're out of time, but this has been wonderful. I learned a lot, and it shows that AI in this case is going to really fundamentally change, and hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed. I have some hopes that the high speed rail in California may actually get finished one of these decades, but that these big civil engineering projects, these big massive projects, can actually come in on time. but it's going to make some major changes for us. We got to change in order, and AI can maybe help us get there.
If only so that the 101 and the 405 are not just completely jammed all the time, right?
Yeah, no doubt. That's exactly right. Hey, thanks again, Alan, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.